In this section, we're going to talk a little bit about economics. We're going to look at goods and services and how countries assign prices to those goods and services, and then how they're acquired throughout the economic system. So remember that a good is something that's tangible, something that you can purchase, that you can hold in your hand. This would be something like a cell phone or a TV or a house or a car. Those are all goods. Food is a good. Services are things that are done for pay. So like a car wash or a haircut, or if you have somebody who comes out and fixes your computer for you, those kind of things. They come out and fix your air conditioner, they fix your car. Those kinds of things are services. So goods and services are purchased and sold throughout economic systems, and they're different. It's done differently based on the kind of economic system. So when we look at it just in general, what an economic system is it's just the way that we get resources from the person who has it to the person who wants it, basically. And we don't have unlimited amounts of those resources, and that's why we term it as a scarcity. So anything that doesn't have unlimited amounts, like the sun, is unlimited. So that would not be considered a resource that was scarce. But when we look at fresh water, we look at gold, we look at even like when you think about like when the new iPhone comes out, there's only so many of them, and that makes it scarce. So when we decide how we're going to solve that problem of scarcity, we look at a few things. We look at what the goods and services are that are going to be produced. And usually that's dictated by the market. So those who are the sellers are going to determine what goods and services that will be purchased, because remember that's all about making a profit. And so they're going to sell the things that make the profit. And then it's about how will they be produced. Is that going to be assembly line? Is it going to be done by hand? Those kinds of things. And then the who should be able to share those goods and services. And a lot of that's determined by cost. So we determine how much an item, if we're looking at goods, for example, how much will that good cost? So if we go back to our iPhone, if you're going to charge $750 for an iPhone, that's going to price some people out of the market. And so it's not necessarily that I'm going to walk up to you and say, you can't buy an iPhone. But if I say that it's $750 instead of $25, then there are people who are not going to be able to purchase it because they don't have that kind of money. So we have different kinds of economic systems. We have a subsistence economy. We're going to start in this green block up here. And this is where we're looking at traditional customs and beliefs. Usually this is like hand to mouth. And so we have hunter-gatherers a lot of times, or we have more agricultural societies that they live on like family farms, those kinds of things. So they're based much more on a smaller scale, generally not by a larger centralized government. We're going to go down to this blue square here now to a controlled economy, where you have a centralized government. And so this is where you look at some of the countries like China or Russia, some of our Eastern Bloc countries, where you have either a dictator or you have a provost or you have somebody who's in charge of the government, and you have very little input by the people into the government. And so they decide that we're going to make this kind of car, and we're going to only make so many of them, and we're going to make them in this way. And so most of those decisions happen at the top level. There's very little movement of people within the economic system. If you are born to someone who is a farmer, then you are going to be a farmer. There's very little way out of that sort of life. We have capitalist societies, which we're not all the way there. We're actually in this combination, this mixed economy down here the United States is. In this one, it would be purely driven by the marketplace, and there would be no government controls at all. Whereas where we are in the mixed economy, which is a combination of the command, which is that centralized one, and the mixed and the market. We're a mix of the two because while we do have the driving force of the marketplace where individuals can decide how they want to price things, we also have laws and regulations that protect both consumers and businesses. And so because of that, we're not truly a pure capitalist economy. We're actually a mixed economy. When we look at what influences our economy, there's a number of factors, as you can see. Some of it's based on what are the goals of our economy. We want our economy to grow. We want wealth to grow. We want it to be efficient so that it's not a cumbersome thing. We want our economy to be stable. It's very difficult as a country when our economy fluctuates and we have recessions, and so we want to maintain that stability. We want it to be equitable. We want there to be justice in the economy where there's equal opportunity for wealth, and we want to have the security that comes from having that stable economy, not only just for the value of the dollar and what we can purchase then in the rest of the world, but also knowing that we have enough money here at home to do what we need to do. The basic characteristics of our economy also impact where the economy is going to go. And one of those things is that fundamental characteristic of the idea of private property. It's one of the tenets of what our country was founded on, that you could come here and that you could have property that was your own, that you weren't beholden to a landlord. That we have that freedom of choice, that we're not stuck into a caste system where just because my father was a farmer doesn't mean I need to be a farmer. I can be something else. We want that freedom of enterprise where we can start new businesses and we can be entrepreneurs and we can go out and do our own thing. And we also want limited government control. We want some because we want to make sure that we maintain that equity and that security, but we also want to make sure that government doesn't overstep and isn't telling us every single thing that we can do. So all of these factors are going to influence our economy and the way that our economy is driven. Also, what's also going to influence our economy is as the government is making some of those laws and regulations, those are going to influence the direction that the economy can go in. And that's part of where environmental science comes into it, or where the economy impacts environmental science. So when we look at why producers are making things, it's obviously to make a profit. So that gives you some power, actually, as the consumer. The producer's going to produce the goods and services that are going to make a profit for them. They're not going to make something that's going to be a failed endeavor. Like if they start to see that it's not going well, they're going to stop. Think about how many TV shows that you've liked that have been canceled after only a few episodes. If the consumers aren't buying it, they're not watching it, and they're not doing it, then they're going to stop. They're going to stop making it, or they're going to try to adjust it to make it into something better. And so as a consumer, what that gives you is that power to help decide what's going to be in the marketplace. Because if you buy something, then you're basically voting for it, and you're giving it your support, and then the producers are going to make more of that or that similar type of object. And this is one area where consumers can actually really help the environment, because if they choose products that are more environmentally friendly, then more of those will be produced. Many years ago, if you weren't looking for like cleaning products for your home that weren't very toxic, it was very difficult to find things that were environmentally friendly, and what there was out there was very expensive. But as they started to see, as the producers started to see a demand for environmentally friendly products, you started to see more products out there. So you have things like Greenworks and Seventh Generation and all these other, I mean, they're even getting into generics now with some of their environmentally friendly cleaners. And so the price starts to come down. So the consumers actually influenced that because the producers saw that that's what was wanted. And so they made it. And as more people bought it, then there became more of them, and then the price came down. So in addition to providing those regulations to help control economies, like to prevent monopolies and to prevent consumer fraud and that kind of a thing, there's other parts of the role that government has. Part of that's for national defense. And while you might say, well, how does that influence the economy? Think about all the things that are purchased for national defense and how much money that costs. So it's an integral part of our economy. We look at police and fire protection, also funded out of the government, so that's providing public goods and services. Courts and jails. We look at parks, and we look at streets and highways and bridges and their construction and their maintenance, education and public transportation. And wherever the government is providing public goods and services, they also have an influence about how those public goods and services are going to be run and how environmentally friendly they're going to be. So we have lots of different opportunities for our economy to be a power for good, essentially, for the environment. Trade is also a huge part of our economy, whether that's from our imports or our exports. So imports are the things that are brought into the country from other nations. So we bring them in for sale. Usually these are goods. Sometimes they're services, but for the most part they're goods. And so some things like cars and toys and cell phones. We bring lots of other things in though too, like on your apple juice, a lot of those If they don't say that the apples were grown in the United States, a lot of times they were grown in a different country and then brought here. When you think about things like grapes and most of your fruits, actually, some of them you'll look at the label and they'll say this comes from Chile or this comes from, like they bring them in from other parts of the world. So lots of different things can be imports. And then exports are things that we send someplace else for sale. So like exit, import like coming in. And we export some of the same kinds of things. We export automobiles and technology and all sorts of things. That trade between nations leads to stability between nations, because if you are trade partners, then you're less likely to go to war with somebody else if they have things that you want or need. And so when we look at how important trade is, it's very important for global security. On the other hand, though, we have to, and it's also a way to help protect the environment. We talked about the Endangered Species Act and the Red List, and this is one of those things that's restricted. So when we talk about restrictions on trade, when we say things like with the Endangered Species Act, you can't trade these things. You can't do that. And so the laws that the government puts in place are not only to protect the trade relations, but also to protect the environment or endangered species as well. So we talked a little bit about the international relationship, but it also, we get better competition. So sometimes that will improve our products and we'll get better prices, kind of like we were talking about when consumers wanted to have some of those environmentally friendly products and some more of them got created. Well, it also happens between countries as well. You have better choice. There are many, many things that you, especially when you talk about food, that you eat right now that are not indigenous to the United States. Very few things that you eat are actually indigenous here, and so it really does expand what we can have and what we can sell. Some ways that trade can be restricted are through tariffs and quotas and embargoes. So a tariff is like a tax. When we say you can bring it in here, but you're gonna pay us so much money to bring it in. We can put a quota. We can say you can only import 500,000 cars a year or something like that. Or we can embargo and say we're not going to trade with you at all. Generally, the embargo happens because there's some really significant political issues, or there's some concerns with national security and things like that going on. So NAFTA was one example of an influence on the trade. So the North American Free Trade Agreement basically opened the borders between the United States, Canada, and Mexico, and it removed the tariffs. And so we had a lot of businesses that actually moved out of the United States, but it is fully implemented at this point in time. So what that also means is that some of the goods that are produced out in Mexico are much more easily brought up into the United States. We've seen some impact on our economy because of this, both beneficial and negative. So when we look at, okay, so what does all this talk about the economy have to do with environmental science? I want you to think about the fact that when countries cannot feed their people, that the environment loses some of its importance. So when you have a weak economy in an area, then you tend to have less emphasis placed on environmental quality. When you have areas where the economy is more stable, then we have that luxury to make choices that are better for the environment. And so early on in our history, especially as we were going through the Industrial Revolution, we didn't take a lot of time to think about what was going to happen to the environment as we were burning all this coal and we were having all these factories running and things like that. And now as we've moved past that point in our demographic transition and we are a developed nation, we have that luxury to sit and think about, well, how do our economic decisions impact the environment?